Let's get into this and a whole lot more with a great panel here this evening. Rita Panahi, my colleague here at Sky News, Nicholas Rees, the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne, and Michael Kroger, who called it down the middle, but we know he's the former Victorian Liberal Party President and a man who'll fire up on behalf of us all. So, Rita, Prime Minister finally ends up in Alice Springs with all of those caveats. He spends more time in the private jet than he does in Alice Springs. They move the press conference from outside to inside, and the solution at this point in time is to reverse the dumb decision that the Northern Territory government, not the Morrison government, made in the election year. Do you think we've solved the problem in Alice Springs, or we just solved the media problem of this week?
Well, he was really shamed into going there, wasn't he, by Sky News, 2GB, The Australian. Much of the rest of the media has ignored this very important issue, but there was eventually enough pressure and he dropped everything and went there. So I do applaud that he's at least made that move, and there is going to be some meaningful action that will help alleviate some of the suffering there, because it is out of control. If that was happening in Melbourne, if that was happening in Sydney, you would hear about nothing else for weeks. But this is happening in Australia, and so much of the population, including the media, turn a blind eye to it. It's too difficult. The reasons, the narrative doesn't fit what they like, so they just ignore it, and never mind all the innocent people who are suffering there. And you're right, Senator Price said this would happen. She put out, I remember, a statement in June last year. She's Nostradamus-like, predicting precisely what we've seen. And she's ignored. And she was not only ignored, attacked. This is the problem. All they care about is changing Australia Days from January 26, changing the flag, having a welcome to country, an acknowledgement of country every time you take a step. But what actually matters to those communities, what actually will save lives, that is forgotten with this preoccupation with the trivial. So I'm glad at least the Prime Minister's there, even if it's for a very short time, and there's a little bit of national attention on this.
Senator Price, 5th of June of 2022. It'll take less than 12 months for the elites to destroy this country. The Teals, the Greens will be turning themselves inside out, crying about climate change while people in the bush die. Very grave times ahead, is what she said. Nicholas, again, I'm glad the Prime Minister was there, but when he spends more time in the jet getting there and back than being there, I don't believe he's all in. I believe it was media management, successful media management, because to many they'll say tick and flick, which of course is the whole problem with this issue for 20, 30 and 40 years.
Look, I don't think the Prime Minister's visit is going to solve all the problems, but I do think it's good that the Prime Minister has made this visit and shown that it's something that is high on his agenda. I think the point you make, that this has been going on for 20 or 30 years, is a really important one. This is a complex situation, and while I think the move today around the limiting on the sale of grog and grog sales being banned on certain days is a good step, I'd like to see further measures as well. I do think we need to see a significant increase in the police presence in Alice Springs. I think they need to set up some sober-up centres. I know at the City of Melbourne, we have a couple of 100,000 people out partying on the streets of Melbourne on the weekend, and we have sober-up centres. Excellent one run by the Salvation Army, other ones available.
It's not a bad idea.
So it's not a jail, not a detention centre, just place where people can get off the street, sober up, and hopefully get back to their lives. And look, I think the big sort of fundamental issue here is that
Nicholas,
we do need to go after those underlying issues and make sure that people who live in Alice Springs have a life with purpose, have job opportunities, and those underlying tough issues are addressed.
But Nicholas, sober-up centres, have you seen the footage that's coming out of there? Have you seen the violence and just how out of control it can be? I mean, how are you going to manage that and just have people go somewhere and have some quiet time and recover and go home? I mean, the problems here are so much deeper than that. You can't compare people partying in the CBD of Melbourne with what's happening up there. That's not people partying. That's not people going out and enjoying themselves. That is just lawless thuggery, and innocent people are being hurt. And I'm getting emails. I'm sitting here in Melbourne. I'm getting emails from people, locals up there, saying, we're scared to leave the house. We have to take this measure and that measure. Things that you just would not expect any Australian to be doing to feel safe.
Sure, I agree. It's ugly. It's totally unacceptable in this country. I'm not saying it's a solution to everything. I'm just saying it's part of the solution, along with stronger police presence, attacking some of those underlying social issues, and I think stronger bans on the sale of grog as
Michael,
well.
what about
And how about the people who decided, sorry, just one thing, people who decided that this was a good idea, the people whose ideology trumped rationality, how about there's some consequences for those people? How about those people are never allowed to advise again on policy? How about that? Because it seems like we keep listening to all the wrong voices, and when these disasters occur, there's no accountability at all. Those people just go on and give more advice that leads to more disaster. And I'm just so sick of this. I am so sick of... Sorry, go on, Paul.
No, I was going to say, what about the Chief Minister resigning? It was her decision, her government, when it comes to the grog. We know what's happened here. What's the accountability that comes in there? Again, Michael, all politicians stage manage things. It's just always so amazing, right? When you get forensic coverage of a Prime Minister going into Lismore after the floods about who he meets with and who he doesn't and how long and all the rest of it, but none of it is replicated about this particular situation because the bulk of the media doesn't want to talk about it or likes the Prime Minister.
Mate, that's absolutely right. So what you've got here, by the way, is this Labor government in the Northern Territory has been there for 6.5 years, by the way.
Yes.
I gather Albo overrode them today on grog. Good on him if he did. First thing I want to say is congratulations to Albo for going. I didn't think he'd go, but thank goodness he went. But what we're now learning, to his detriment, is he was warned about this not only by Jacinta Price, but by Aboriginal leaders months ago. And Peter Dutton warned him after Dutton went there, I think in October, Dutton said tonight. So Albo's known about this for months, and he's been asleep in a hammock. He's been asleep in a hammock for months on this issue. And what's he been talking about? The Voice. And as one of his Labor MPs said, no one in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory is talking about The Voice. Not a single person. And what you've got is this sort of elite Aboriginal community, the sort of political class, the enriched class, the privileged Aboriginal leadership who are on all these government bodies and boards, and they're chancellors of universities, and they are a million miles away from Alice Springs and what's really happening. And as Rita said, this visit today did not fit the narrative. So the press conference is after the 6 o'clock news. They are trying to run dead on this because this is not the narrative that Albo wants to talk about. He doesn't want to talk about the number one objective of this government being to do something about Aboriginal disadvantage. It's about this wonderful, new wave thing that we're going to have a voice. Well, there are thousands of Aboriginal corporations and organisations already giving voice to Parliament, to legislation, to Welcome to Country, etc., etc. We're not short on great, distinguished Aboriginal voices. They are listened to, and this distraction with The Voice is extremely damaging to the health and welfare of Aboriginal people. I remember 40 years ago when Graham Richardson, the great Graham Richardson, who was Minister for Health in the Hawke Keating government, I think he did an interview, Graham will correct me if I'm wrong, on 60 Minutes, where he went up to the Northern Territory and to Queensland to try and fix the problem of disadvantage in Aboriginal communities. 40 years on, we've still got these same problems. What we don't need is a voice. We need more practical help on the ground: education, health, welfare, jobs, an end to domestic violence, an end to alcoholism. That's what we need. Practical, on the ground, day-to-day help, mate. Not theoretical models about people going to Canberra, sitting in Parliament House.
Don't try that sly trick on Australians.
It's not a trick.
It's a sly trick you're playing there. Australia is capable of fixing the problems in Alice Springs and creating a voice to Parliament. It's not one or the other.
But Richard tried that.
It should
We've
just
been
be
trying that
one.
for 40
It should
years.
be just
In fact, the
one.
creation of a voice will create a better channel of advice to
rubbish.
government on these
And
things.
rubbish.
You know it. That
We can
is
do both. In
absurd,
fact, they
Nicholas,
complement
and
each other.
you know it.
It's not a choice.
Nick, clearly we
between the
can't
two.
do both. These
Nicholas,
problems have been existing for 40
we don't
years.
want to do both, Michael.
If you could do both, the problems would exist, mate. The problem is not enough focus in this country by the Aboriginal leadership is on these problems. I mean, people like Pearson have done a magnificent job over the years, and you get people like Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price warning about these problems. That's where the concentration should be, not on things like The Voice. As Price and others say, this is not going to help one Aboriginal child by approving this thing in the Parliament? Not a single one.
You know what? On election night, the very first thing that new Prime Minister to be talked about was the voice. That would make you think that he actually cares about the Indigenous community, because if he did care, he wouldn't have to be shamed into going up there by a media campaign. He would have been there at the first sign that these policy changes were having a real impact, a disastrous impact. No. I'm telling you, if this was happening in some country town in Victoria or New South Wales or somewhere around Sydney or Melbourne, he would have been there. But no.
Sorry, Rita. I mean, that is dishonest trash talk there.
That is
trash
fact.
talk.
It
you
is
can't
fact.
call for the Prime Minister to go to Alice
That
Springs.
is fact.
Then he goes to Alice Springs and you criticise him for taking too long. Like, come on.
Of course I criticise him for taking too long. If you cared about this issue, you would have been aware of what was happening there too. Obviously, you don't care either, because if you did care, you would have realised these calls for him to go up there didn't start this week. These calls didn't start last week. What we have seen with the mayhem on the streets and the unhinged violence didn't start this week. So please, if you care about this issue, then you take action.
By the way, Paul, why didn't he say on election night, I'm concerned about increasing rates of domestic violence, of alcoholism,
None of them.
of lawlessness, of kids wandering the streets late at night in Aboriginal communities. I'm concerned about the lack of education, etc. Now, plenty of people, including the woman they've appointed to do this coordinating role tonight, have done a very good job in increasing the number of Aboriginal kids going to school, which is a magnificent achievement. But there are still so many problems. Why didn't Albo say that on election night? Why does he have to fall into the new left's thinking of, we need a voice to Parliament, we need an advisory body? For goodness sake.
How many advisory bodies do we need? There are already dozens, if not hundreds, of advisory bodies in this space. So let's not pretend this is something new. The last thing we need is to enshrine toxic race politics into our constitution. Now, that's what it is, Nicholas.
We can pick it up in a second.
It's a race-based referendum, and you cannot argue with that. That is a statement of fact. Now, you might like the idea of a race-based referendum. You may think it's time for it. But that's what it is, Nicholas. I'm sorry if facts offend you, but this is a factual area. So you can run back to the council with your bloody, fever dreams of woke craziness. But right here, we speak facts, and it's a race-based referendum, Nicholas.
All right.
Deal with it.